The labor movement is embroiled in a struggle for the hearts and minds of workers and the public. Following a decades-long slide, the unionization rate in Canada has dropped below 30%, and just 16% of workers in the private sector are union members. Labor is responding to this challenge with new tactics and mergers and acquisitions, such as the coming together of the Canadian Auto Workers Union and the Communications, Energy and Paper Workers Union to form the 300,000-strong Unifor. And the PR battle is on. Todd Humber, Canadian HR Reporter's managing editor, moderated a roundtable discussion to explore the methods unions might try to overcome negative perceptions, such as the notion they are lazy, underworked, have job security for life, and enjoy gold-plated benefits and pension packages that others can only dream about.
We need to challenge. I think people recognize that that's not the reality. The unionized workers, specifically the focus here in the private sector, have gone through tremendous job loss and stagnating wages and reductions in their incomes in a variety of ways. So the idea of jobs for life or gold-plated working conditions is not the reality. Of course, there are the examples people look to, the most highly paid, but there are all sorts of organized workers in hotels and in long-term care facilities and grocery stores and elsewhere who are far from having great security or wonderful conditions. So that's part of it, just getting clear that that's not the reality. And I think one of the key messages that we've heard over the last several years is changing the dynamic that people are not resenting people from the working class, middle class Canadians who have good jobs, and rather turning their attention to the idea that I should have those things too. Why can I not achieve a good standard of living or security in the workplace, rather than trying to focus about taking away from those who already have it? So those are some of the things. I think the main ways we do that is by continuing to do a job on the ground with our membership in the communities, but also ensuring that we're seen as a voice for workers who are excluded, who are marginalized, who are on the outsides of the labor market, and really focusing in there, because that kind of resentment towards unions, we've always had our challenges with the employer community, but I think we have to be very careful and clear that we're not resented by whole parts of working Canadians, and that's a fundamental challenge. So it's a big job.
And in some cases, that big job of changing perceptions could be hampered by negative campaigns that are belittling the labor movement and distorting its history.
Part of the challenge that unions may face at this point, apart from some very realistic shifts in demographics and some very real and very realistic shifts in what people want and need, particularly young people, there is an additional complication, and that is quite a negative and quite inaccurate campaign about what it is how it was that unions arose. And what significance they have and what value they have in maintaining a strong middle class, creating a stable workforce that can withstand economic fluctuation as the economy shifts from historical models into global and national undertakings. There are very real demographic shifts, but there's also, I suggest, a very negative campaign that the union has to address as well.
But not everyone agrees the PR issue is a problem. The real issue is what workers want from their employers, and that may be something unions simply can't offer.
We're not talking about a PR problem. We're talking about the general public having a fundamentally different perspective on the workplace than unions. And so it's not just a problem that necessarily needs solving in our view. What happens is that generally most people are very satisfied with their jobs. They tend to be more satisfied the fact is job satisfaction is driven by factors around communication, the quality of the decision making, the involvement in the running of the business. The workplace is evolving. We're seeing higher educated people. We're seeing people who are more discerning with information. And they're choosing, all surveys show that they'd much rather work in non-unionized workplaces than in unionized ones. And even those, there are a portion of unionized workers who would rather not be unionized. So these kind of shifts, I think, are important to make sure that we've got the appropriate policy means and the policies out there to ensure that it's not a union-centered or an employer-centered kind of perspective. It's what do people want, how do they want to associate themselves, and how do we allow that to take place?
But the idea that workers are content as is doesn't ring true in union halls.
I'm not hearing most Canadian workers saying everything is perfectly fine on the job and everything's lovely and the only thing that is a problem in the workplace is that there's a union around. I think a lot of people are concerned about their security. A lot of people are concerned about the future. They're concerned also about their kids and their kids' future, about what quality of jobs there are. So I think, everyone's entitled to hear how they are going to, but we hear regularly from our members, from people in the community, from youth, that they have significant concerns about what is evolving in the workplace, and they're looking for some way to improve that. And it's our view, and I think, there are different studies out there that say people actually do want to join unions, and that people are pleased to be in a union. They support their organizations. The statistics show somewhere around 50,000 people a year join a union for the first time in Canada. Across the country. So, there is, I think the questions are broader than talking about whether or not unions in the workplace are the fundamental problem. I think the questions are about what do Canadians want in their workplace and from their jobs, and I think it's a much broader question than about whether or not unions are there or not. I think there's other issues at play.
Labour lawyer Jamie Knight said one of the biggest fights may play out in the political realm because of one massive shift that could be on the agenda.
I mean, the elephant in the room is the sweeping change in legislation in the United States, where there are more and more right-to-work states, as the phrase goes. What Elaine, I think, correctly might say is a campaign using a phrase that isn't really an accurate characterization of what the legislation is. There have been significant legislative changes in Saskatchewan, and we have a major political party in Ontario in a minority government situation that has a white paper that clearly spells out its intention to bring forward legislation to transform Ontario's Labor Relations Act and move towards a system whereby there is no dues deduction automatically enforced when a trade union secures the right to represent workers in the workplace. So that's the PR campaign that's going to play out. It's going to play out in the next Ontario election, and there's a real possibility that the next government of Ontario will be formed by a party that proposes to follow the recent example of Michigan, for example, which is a primary competitor for Ontario jobs. So that's the campaign that I think is going to be the interesting one. The issue, and it's not my issue, it's the political issue on the table, is whether or not the RAND formula is going to be done away with in the province of Ontario. And if the RAND formula, which provides for automatic dues deduction in a unionized environment, is done away with, how does the trade union respond to that in a scenario where dues essentially become voluntary as opposed to imposed? And whether that the trade union's view is that necessarily leads to the destruction of the trade union movement in Ontario, or whether there's a trade union response to that, which I haven't heard yet, and I struggle to wonder what it might be. But that's what the issue is, because that's going to be what the political campaign's about.
That it's not the intention of the labor movement to lose that political battle in a variety of ways. Not only the labor movement, but our various community allies and others who will engage very clearly on that question. I think the labor movement has said in a variety of ways, at different levels, that we have no intention of going backwards. 70 years or more, right to work for a variety of reasons. We already have democracy in the workplace. If people don't want a union, they can decertify, and they do that all the time. We're not happy, but if the union loses the support of the membership in the workplace, there are mechanisms, procedures to decertify, and that we see that as a failure, but that happens. And so the model of exclusive representation in the workplace is what we've been built on for the last 70 years. Folks in the room know that. And we don't really have an intention of going immediately away from that. I think others have communicated just very calmly that this will become a problem in the labor relations in Canada. And it'll come back to the employer community one way or another, through the bargaining table or else how. And that's just kind of straight discussion about the way that it's responded to. But I don't think that the intention is to lose that debate, and frankly I don't think there's tremendous support among the community or even necessarily the employer community for that position, but we'll see. This is an ongoing discussion. It's an important one.
Great.
The student in history will remember how the RAND formula came in. I don't think we want to go through that again. So, I sit and I listen to all your positions, and I think when you ask young people, when you ask anybody that is even remotely connected to the world, they understand the role of unions providing what we have today. They're a key driver for the creation of the middle class, for the reduction in the work hours, the paid vacation, all sorts of benefits that we all enjoy. I think we can all agree on that. So, and I think people say that was great, but you're right. What's the future hold for me? And I think that is one of the challenges, and why you call it a PR war, or if you call it an advertising campaign. How do you create a vision for people? How do you then put the leadership behind it? And then how do you execute against that offering and attract people to what you do? Because there is a certain image that they were predominantly blue collar or they're government workers. And gee, I'm neither of those. So where do I fit in? So what's the message? Where are the people that are like me? That's what people always look for in clubs and groups, is where are the people that are like me? And what can you offer me in the future? And I think also creating a sense of collective responsibility that we may not have in the measure that we had before. We tend to split up our benefits packages, so you get exactly this and you get exactly that, and you can tailor it to your individual needs, but we don't think of sort of even a broader need. And I think that's kind of led to the attitude that we're all on our own. So I think if the unions are going to make progress, they've got to make it compelling for people to belong to that group that has an affiliation and an image for them that they can aspire to and want to be part of.
The best tactic for the labor movement may be good old-fashioned education.
The best possible tool, the best possible weapon that the unions have is education. The facts are solid. The process of addressing the PR problem is one of education. What have the unions done? And more importantly, what have you done for me lately? That's the key question, and perhaps the most problematic question given the current trending that we're seeing.